While behavior keeps adding more and more perks with every new character joining the game, it gets harder and harder to make sure all of them get equal attention. I mean, as of this wait. Why does this sound so familiar? Oh, right, because I've already done this topic. Good old Skrump is really scraping the bottom of the idea barrel, isn't he? Your old man isn't as young as he used to be. Don't worry, things won't truly be over until I end up in a YouTube thumbnail with big red text saying, he's done. Luckily, or maybe unluckily for you, I don't plan on calling it quits anytime soon. I've got more than enough ideas hatching, and I definitely haven't done anything I'm going to get canceled for, unless you count having the most lukewarm takes in the DBD community to be cancel-worthy. In that case, I am completely and totally cooked. Anyway, back on topic. I knew when I made my video about underrated survivor perks, I'd end up making one about killer perks too. How else am I going to keep the fence-sitter allegations going? Plus, I always like making the inverse version of videos that are based on one side in particular, like I did for my top 10 survivor and killer perks. When doing that, I can use the view count and like to dislike ratio to see what side of the fence you guys stand on, because that's definitely going to be an accurate measurement, right? Yeah. Regardless, you guys seem to have thoroughly enjoyed the last one, and hey, I enjoyed making it, so here we are. Today, I'm going to be taking a look at some underrated killer perks to determine 10 killer perks you should be running. But first, like the first time, we've got to establish some things before getting into it. I'm not hopping into the deep end immediately. Not yet. As you probably know, different killer perks are typically a lot scarier to run than different survivor perks. Because the person playing killer is solely responsible for their side of the match, branching out and picking new perks that you haven't tried yet can be a daunting task, way more than it is on the survivor side. It's very easy to find what works for you and lock it in so hard that you rarely branch out and try something else. I get it. Trust me, as someone who plays the killer role a lot, not even King Arthur could get me to pull pain resonance out of my build sometimes. That remote gen regression is far too nice. There's a reason over a quarter of killer players use it in their builds, and frankly, I don't blame them. I just wish my survivor teammates would remember to hop off a gen when another survivor is about to be hooked. I don't know why people still struggle to do that. Anyway, there are a lot of positives in branching out and trying perks that you might not typically run, even if it's a scary thing to do a lot of the time. That's what I'm here for. Consider this a small guide for 10 unpopular killer perks that have been battle tested by yours truly, and why I think you should consider at least giving them a try. However, we are going to run into a bit of a challenge that I hadn't faced when making the survivor version of this video, being killer strength disparity. Obviously, killer powers are not all the same, and that might make certain perks better on some killers than others. Like running a perk such as Surge on Legion in comparison to running a perk like Dark Devotion on Wraith. Obviously, one choice is way better than the other, and I'm gonna run into a challenge here when trying to explain why certain perks work on some killers and why others don't. But that's a problem for future Skrump. I guess I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. Instead, I feel the need to remind everyone of the rule I set up the last time I did this. In case you don't remember, I had a specific rule for determining what counted as an underrated DBD perk, and the same rule still applies here. Using Nightlight, I'm only allowed to choose perks with under a 1% pick rate, as they tend to be closer to what I'd actually consider to be unpopular by the community standards. Yes, I know Nightlight isn't perfect in terms of their statistics, but what else am I gonna use? It's the most up-to-date and consistently refreshed way to get Dead by Daylight statistics, and I certainly don't trust the statistics that Behavior themselves only occasionally uploads, and unfortunately the official Dead by Daylight stats tracker only applies to your matches for some reason, which means I can't really use it for community statistics. Again, as I mentioned before, the statistics I used in this video are accurate as I'm writing this script, which means it might not be totally accurate if you fact check me when this video goes live. It's not that I'm lying. I mean, what would I gain from that? It's just that Nightlight is consistently being updated and the statistics with it. Also, in case you've forgotten, the ranking isn't based on what perks I think are best. Instead, as we go further down the list, or up the list, I guess, the perks will be less and less picked. So strength has nothing to do with where they're placed. Only the pick rate does. Alright, we all good? Everybody clear on what we're doing? Sweet. Let's jump into it. Number 10, Machine Learning. Machine Learning is one of those perks that is very situational, but when you get value out of it, you get value out of it. When kicking a generator, that generator becomes compromised. After that generator is completed, the killer is granted 8% haste and undetectable that lasts for 60 seconds in total. While the caveat of a generator you kick needing to be completed might sound like it makes the perk awful, you'd probably be very surprised at just how good it can really be at times. 60 seconds of both undetectable and what is essentially the haste level of Bloodlust 2 is extremely good, and survivors who end up on the receiving end of those effects will probably be wondering just what insane build you're running, as so few people use this perk that I guarantee a lot of people don't know what it even does. In fact, it only has a 0.89% pick rate, which makes it pretty uncommon in most games. While kicking a generator that's almost done and letting the survivors finish it might be a risky play, I think the benefits that come from machine learning more than make up for that risk factor. The fact that it can be activated multiple times in a game makes it less situational than you might think, and you'd be surprised at just how powerful this perk can be when it comes into play. I highly recommend trying it out in a future match if you haven't already. Number 9. Forced Hesitation. I guess we're going from one singularity perk to the other, huh? Forced Hesitation comes in at number 9 with only a 0.83% pick rate, which is definitely due to the situational design of the perk, like what we see with machine learning. This is one of those perks that is very dependent on who you're playing, but can be very good against survivors who are grouping up and maybe waiting for a flashlight save or something along those lines. When downing a survivor while running this perk, any other survivors within a 16-meter range end up with a 20% hinder effect that lasts for 10 seconds. I don't think I really need to explain to you how drastic a 20% hinder is, and combined with some killers with really strong insta-down abilities like Oni and Hillbilly, this perk can be a godsend when it comes to snowballing with their powers. Unfortunately, I do think this perk is made way better when combined with Infectious Fright, but that being said, the perk definitely has its value. If I were to change anything about this perk to make it less situational, I think I'd have it show the aura of survivors within that range when the perk activates, or if anything, maybe buff the base range a bit. Either way, it's a good perk and is great to run on killers who can really take advantage of its effects. Number 8. Dark Devotion. Dark Devotion is one of those really fun perks that I wish I saw in matches some more. Unfortunately, it only has a 0.80% pick rate, which is a shame considering how fun the perk can be to use. When your obsession loses a health state by any means, Dark Devotion activates. For the next 45 seconds, a terror radius of 40 meters is transferred onto that obsession, and then you become undetectable. This perk is absolutely hilarious and creates so much chaos between survivors and their teammates that I can't help but love its design. Even if the survivors are on comms, that constant confusion can really help you out in a lot of different ways, and I love trying to get as much use out of this perk as I can. If you take this perk with another one that switches the obsession, such as Furtive Chase or Nemesis, you'll get a lot of value out of it, and it can create some really fun matches where the survivors feel like you're everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. I'm not even sure what I'd change about it given the chance. I just love the design of it and wish more people used it. It definitely deserves some more love. Number 7. Make Your Choice. Hey, speaking of scaring the absolute shit out of survivors, we have Make Your Choice, which is a perk that was added ages ago with the Saw chapter and has barely been changed since. Don't fix what isn't broken, huh? At a 0.75% pick rate, not many people choose this perk nowadays, which I think is due to how outclassed it has become compared to some other perks with similar effects. But don't let that push you away from using it. It's definitely got its benefits. When a survivor rescues their teammate from the hook while you are at least 32 meters away, they scream and are exposed for 60 seconds. Not only does this perk promote anti-tunneling, which is great, I will always love that, but it also makes healing under hooks so much less common, which can be great under some circumstances. I really like the way it puts altruistic survivors in risky positions as they have to make their choice by putting their own health on the line for their teammates. It does benefit the killers with mobility a lot more, as they can get away from the hook and get back to it so much faster than a large number of killers on the roster, but that's just a consistent DVD problem with, killer strength and killer power design. It's not like the perk is to blame for that. Talking about that problem would be talking about how Dead by Daylight is very poorly balanced in some cases, but regardless, Make Your Choice can be a fun perk that pushes survivors towards thinking way more about their decision making, which I'm a huge fan of. Slapping this perk on specific builds can be a lot of fun, and can also be the icing on the cake for making survivors quake in their boots. I think Behavior could probably get away with buffing this perk to give you more information, like they did by adding the Scream a while ago, but it's still good regardless. Number 6. THWACK. I feel like I'm absolutely crazy when I talk about THWACK. Am I really the only person that likes this perk? Seriously? It's so much fun. You guys are definitely sleeping on it. I swear to God. I see that 0.55% pick rate. I know you guys aren't running it. It breaks my cold Heart. In case you haven't seen the video I made on my top 10 killer perks, THWACK is one of my favorite perks in the entire game, and I don't even know why exactly. When running THWACK, you start with 3 tokens. When you break a pallet or breakable wall, a token is consumed and you see the auras of any survivors within 36 meters, as well as making them scream. It's a simple perk, but one I absolutely adore running on killers that shred through pallets quickly, like Bubba or Nemesis, Demogorgon for example. This perk can be great information regardless of the situation, and I absolutely adore running this perk when it comes to tracking down sneaky survivors who may not see the THWACK activation coming. I mean, what can I say that I haven't said already? Please run this perk. It's absolute cinema. But if I were to buff this perk, I think maybe the tokens are a little too unforgiving. I mean, it's not like the perk's effects are super strong. I don't think it really even needs tokens, maybe just like a short cooldown or something. I don't know. I feel like the tokens are a little too much, but regardless, I still think it's an insanely fun perk to run, and you should try it out. Number 5, Hex Retribution. Hex Retribution is one of those perks that is insanely good if you happen to be in the mood for a hex build, and apparently only 0.55% of people ever are. When a survivor interacts with a totem, regardless of whether or not it's lit, they become oblivious for 60 seconds, but if they happen to cleanse a hex totem, all survivors' auras become visible for 20 seconds. Again, all survivors' auras, not just the person that cleansed the totem. If you're running a totem build, this perk is incredible in regards to getting information and maybe getting survivors off totems altogether. 20 seconds of aura reading, which can be activated multiple times depending on how many totems you have, is pretty amazing and can definitely win you games if you happen to get that aura reading at the right time. The oblivious effect is also pretty good, but it's hard to know the second a survivor touches a totem without another perk feeding you that information. Regardless, Retribution is a really strong perk, and one that can be really good if you bring the right build with it. I'm surprised more people don't take it into their games. Again, it is a hex perk, and as we all know, hex perks are supposed to be high risk, high reward, so you might not get as much value out of it as you could have, but that's just the risk with taking a hex perk. Number 4, Hex Crowd Control. Moving from one hex perk to the other, we have Crowd Control, which has a 0.53% pick rate as of right now, which is probably due to the perk being sort of a budget bamboozle, but that doesn't mean it isn't worth running. When this hex totem is active, a survivor performing a fast vault at any window will block it for the entire duration the totem is standing, which means some really strong windows can be blocked for the entire game, assuming that survivors don't find the totem and cleanse it before that happens. This effect also applies to a total of 5 different windows, which means you have many opportunities to get value out of it. Assuming survivors aren't prepared to handle it, you can stop some windows from ever being an issue, which can be a game changer depending on the map you're on. This perk can turn things like main building windows and shack windows into Swiss cheese at the drop of a hat, and it's incredibly useful when that happens. Swiss cheese referring to it's bad, not that there's a bunch of holes in it. I guess that would mean more windows. You get what I'm saying. Of course, it is a hex totem, and like I said with Retribution, that means it's high risk, high reward. But I think the reward is more than enough to make up for it. If I were to change this perk, maybe I'd have it cycle through windows, which means it would be less dependent on what windows are blocked, but that's the only thing I can really think of changing for this perk. It's pretty strong. Number 3, Deathbound. Entering the top 3, we have Deathbound, a perk that I feel like a lot of you forgot exists, and I can't really blame you. With the more perks behavior adds, the more a lot of them start blending together and feeling like slightly different versions of the exact same thing, especially when the names start sounding similar. But Deathbound is pretty cool. At a 0.53% pick rate, Deathbound is a perk that punishes altruistic actions, specifically the person performing those actions. When one survivor heals another, the survivor that performed the healing action becomes oblivious until they lose a health state, which means this perk can last for a while. It also, for some reason, shows the aura of the person they healed to said survivor, which I don't really understand. That's gotta go. It's a killer perk, not a survivor perk. Why are we giving the survivor's aura reading? Anyway, having a survivor oblivious and only ending that effect when they lose a health state is pretty good, and gives the killer a lot of control over that survivor and how much information they have, combined with the fact that they scream when the heal is completed, and you might find the survivors much quicker than you would without. The perk is great, and given how strong healing is for survivors, I'd say it's definitely worth taking into matches. Number 2, Cruel Limits. Next up, we have Cruel Limits, which currently has a 0.27% pick rate, which actually genuinely surprises me. When a generator is completed, every single vault location on the map is blocked for 30 seconds. seconds. Again, it's a situational perk that can really come in handy if it happens to activate at the right time. That activation does lie in the survivor's hands, unfortunately, but that's not gonna be the biggest deal. I mean, what are survivors gonna do? Not finish generators? Yeah, right. It does have the downside of really depending on the map you get, but having all windows blocked for 30 seconds will definitely come in handy regardless of the map you find yourself on. However, it is hilarious to watch this perk activate on a map like Larry's. That's why it surprises me that the perk is so unused. Is it niche and situational? Yeah, sure. Is it bad? I don't think so, do you? Maybe it's the fact that cruel limits has been changed a handful of times that people don't realize it's much stronger now than it was before, which is fair. However, I definitely think you should try it in a couple games if you haven't done so already. Number 1, genetic limits. Last and, well, kind of least, we have genetic limits. It's kind of weird that every single singularity perk is on this list. Odd. Anyway, genetic limits comes in at only a 0.27% pick rate, which is a little shocking. Well, I guess it kind of isn't. The perk activates when a survivor loses a health state by any means. When they do, they become exhausted for 8 seconds. That's it. Yeah, it's simple, but it can come in handy quite a bit when going against a team with a lot of exhaustion perks, especially Dead Hard or like Iron Will, which turns off when you're exhausted, which survivors will rarely get value out of when you're running this perk. This makes the perk really good on a killer like Spirit, for example, who can get a lot of use out of it thanks to not having to worry about Iron Will anymore. It does unfortunately get outclassed by a perk like Mindbreaker, which is legitimately just better in a lot of ways, but I really like the idea here. It could certainly use a buff, and hopefully down the line it'll get one. As it is right now, I understand why people might not choose it over a lot of perks that are just better. But I have a soft spot for genetic limits, and I hope it gets its time in the sun someday. I think you could definitely buff the 8 seconds to something else, maybe like 15 seconds, but I still think it's got its uses, and if you're playing a certain killer that can take a lot of advantage out of it, you might be missing out. I actually had a much easier time finding underrated killer perks than I did for survivor perks. You could probably tell by the end of the survivor video that I really started struggling to find good perks towards the end, and Cut Loose was the only one I could really justify giving a spot on that list. However, it wasn't the same for killer perks. Not really. I think this is due to the fact that killer perks are generally just stronger than survivor perks, as they sort of have to be based on the asymmetrical nature of Dead by Daylight. If a majority of survivor perks were nearly as good as most killer perks, we'd start running into some massive flaws in terms of the game's balance, like we've seen before. Decisive Strike, made for this, for the people, buckle up, stuff like that. The fact that a strong perk on the survivor side can show up 4 times in a single match speaks for itself, I think. Anyway, I hope I was able to convince you to run some of these perks that I talked about today, as I believe that all of them have their applications and designated plays in the right build, and maybe you might fall in love with the perk you hadn't tried up until now. I guess we'll see. Either way, I'm gonna go run THWACK in every single one of my matches and laugh at everybody else for not using such a fun perk. Until then, that's it from me, gamers. Hope you enjoyed and have a great day.